Das beide boilem mulle hoort, Robert Troy zocht, en roensel correntí. Maar ik zei hem heen, wil gelorlor kestenis roen, ta harve tafel te gunne a ta plele cordum lani, na ta ik toga lani. As the glorlor doodline rif tishmohari and lenyo. Unfortunately, in the time I have, I won't have an opportunity to span across the huge number of issues that have been raised in the motion put forward by Deputy Troy. I think it's interesting to note that before the last election, a second year of free early education was promised. It never happened. Then when the Minister went ahead with the decision to reduce the age at which the entitlement to lone parents allowance would be stopped from 13, which had been set when I was Minister, to 7, she promised that we were going to get a Scandinavian type of childcare service for the parents involved. I understand the scheme that was introduced was availed of by approximately 200 parents. Now, the reality was that when we brought it down from 22, as it was actually, to 13, I think it was reasonable to say that there was no reason why a lone parent or a one-parent family, the parent in that family, couldn't go working because of childcare commitments. As I used to often say, you could have had a situation in the old regime where the child could have been in the same class in university as the parent, and the parent getting lone parents allowance and not being required to seek employment on the basis that they needed to care for the child. And that was clearly not a sustainable situation, and it wasn't a good situation, and I think most of the lone parent groups accepted that. And initially the proposal was to go down to 12, but I raised it to 13 on the basis that some children are still in the primary school until their 13th year and they work a short day. But I did feel that with secondary school children, arrangements could be made by parents for the time from the child would leave school to the parent would come home, and that anyway, at that age, the children were not as dependent on the parents as a younger child might be. But I still feel that 7 years of age, without pervasive backup services across the country, is still too young, and I still feel that the Minister, in introducing that change without the backup changes in the childcare services, was very unfair to one-parent families. And I still believe she should relook at that issue. The second issue I'd just like to touch on very briefly is the lack of a career structure. And because this has grown up incrementally, I think it is fair to say that there isn't a proper career structure for people involved in the childcare sector, and that this should be introduced and proper structures should be put in place, and that certainly the dialogue should be put in place that would obviate the necessity for people to come up and protest to Leinster House regarding this matter. I now want to move on to the issue that's not necessarily directly related to, we say, the quality of childcare and so on, although that is very, very important. But it's just a day-to-day reality faced by many, many parents. Now, as the Minister knows, there's 100,000 people with mortgage difficulties and arrears in this country. That's 100,000 families. And in many of those cases, there are young children. And in many, many of those cases, it'll take two incomes to come to a resolution of their financial difficulties. But the problem at the moment is that there is no assistance, there is no recognition given to the cost of childcare, except for the medical card, for these families. And I think it's interesting that if you take somebody on €800 a week, of course, by the time you take the USC and the PAYE and the PRSI off that, union fees and all the other bits and pieces that come off a wage, 50% of that has disappeared, so you're now on €400 a week. And if you take €200 a week for childcare costs, particularly if the parent has to travel, and therefore are gone for a long day, that means that for 40 hours, you have €200 to contribute to the household costs and the mortgage. And these are a particularly hard-pressed group of people in our society. Some of them have better jobs, but if they do, some of the people who have better jobs also have bigger mortgages. And mortgages that were taken out during the Celtic Tiger era, when people expected that there would be promotions, for example, within the public service, rather than cutbacks, and that there would be an upward career path over time, rather than what happened. And in some cases, yes, people overstretched themselves in their ambition in terms of maybe getting a house that was slightly beyond their means, in the expectations that over time most people's incomes go up. And of course that didn't happen. As I often pointed out, if you took a situation, for example, of two executive officers in the civil service who bought a house back in 2005, in the normal expectation of things, they would have expected to get increments, an increase in wages, and promotions between 2005 and 2014. Because the reality is that due to the fact that there hasn't been recruitment, and that was necessary, and the pension services levy and so on, that what was a reasonable expectation changed into something different. Now, for those without very high mortgages, for those without the cost of young children, for those who had progressed in their careers before this happened, most of that was bearable. It was difficult, but it was bearable, it was dealable with. But for the people caught in the perfect storm, even in relatively secure employment, and lots of people were not in secure employment, they found themselves in a situation that the two ends didn't meet. And I believe that one of the issues that has to be tackled, because it's one of the challenges, how do you differentiate between those who have these big costs because of children? And remember, children are the future of our country, and those that don't. And that is by recognising formally in the system that people with high childcare costs because they have to work need assistance. And this goes beyond, as I said, the much wider issue that I accept is valid of the development of the child by having preschool, etc., and goes to just a hard day-to-day reality for a lot of people of trying to survive in the circumstances that they found them in. And the challenge we face in trying to isolate the scarce resources to help those who need it most.
No more than one focus.
Recognising all of the time that children are not only, obviously, the part of the family and responsibility, and that's essentially where they are, but that children in their generality, and therefore families, are the future, because it's the children of this generation that obviously are going to be the providers in the next generation. And therefore, if we do not sustain families in reasonable comfort, allow them a measure of ability to provide the normal things a child would expect growing up, I think we're not only being very unfair to those families and children, but I think we're actually damaging the future of this country.